There are subtle differences in the shapes of some of these parts, and just as manufacturing changed over the course of time, these shutters were made. So I've got to find a component that's the same shape as this one. This piece is fine, there's no corrosion on there, that looks good. But this little piece here, this forms part of this assembly, that certainly had corrosion on it, so I'm hopeful that I can find one that's the same. That one there looks good. So that's what I'll use. Yeah, it may occur to you to ask, well, what happens to the old parts? What happens to the pieces that I have rejected for one reason or another? Well, I can tell you one thing, they don't get thrown out. And they don't get thrown out because they might not suit me today, because I think they're a little bit ugly or a bit rough. But at some stage in the future, I might be very, very pleased to see those components, and less than perfect though they might be, they'll be an awful lot better than none at all. So I don't throw out parts unless they're completely broken, because there's always a likelihood I can come back in at a later date and make some minor repair if I need to, or even a major repair. I've got to check that this piece actually moves on here, because I'm not convinced that it does. Yeah, it does. It moves, that swivels freely. Getting these things assembled is tricky because you have to hook a spring into position, and you have to hold these two components together with one pair of tweezers while you're trying to stretch the spring into position. Is that it? Yeah, it went without a fight. That's a good one. So I'm starting to assemble the pieces I need now. And I'm looking at the plate that holds everything together here, and this is the part of the release mechanism here to this lever. So I'm checking to see if this has got any corrosion on it, and it appears to be pretty good. So I'm going to clean that, and I hope to reuse it. I'm going to lose my spring. Check that the holes are clean, that various things pivoted. Oh, that looks good. That's looking promising. We'll start putting some of this into the shutter. I'll start with the pallets. They drop in. Now the pallets have rounded edges on the top and they're dead flat on the bottom. That's just from the press operation when they were formed, basically. But the dead flat surface goes to the bottom. The rounded edges of the top is useful because it stops things catching on that. Our little wheel that drives the pallet wheel, normally I put a smear of molybdenum paste on that, on the toe of the cam. This cam here swings the lever that moves our flash contact. I just put some on there, drop that over the post. That's all running smoothly, that's all good. Our high speed spring, our 1/500th of a second spring. Checking the state of that, there's nothing wrong with that. That goes on there like that. Our flash contact, our moving flash contact. is here. Looking at the state of this, it's got a couple of fine springs here which flip the lever backwards or forwards. That appears to be good, so we'll just put that into position. There were subtle changes made to the flash contacts and levers, and so I don't want to mix these parts up if I don't need to. Much better if I can use all the original parts, or as many of them as possible, and not have too much of a struggle finding things. Right, there's the screw. When doing this up, it's important to make sure that the lever's not sitting on top of that cam there. It's back behind it. It's not pulling down flat for some reason. That flash contact not seated correctly. Something's not sitting down here. I have to lift that off and find out what's going on. It's like the flash contact's not seated into position. It's sitting down now. There's our pallet, let's put that back in there. I'm just moving that cam backwards and forwards to see that that lever swings across. It does, it looks a little bit tight there. I wonder if that's bent out slightly. That's better. Right, the operating lever. I'll just put a wipe of molybdenum paste on the tip of that where it latches into position. And some on the pivot point for good measure. And that sits in this way. And couples to our cam, and getting the timing right is important. That's correct. So that in that position, when this lever is locked behind that latch, this lever is free to swing along the flat side of that cam. When that's open and this swings across, the cam should push that lever across, firing the flash, and it does. So that's good. The spring for this lever needs to go in. This is a dark colour, so it's not easy to tell whether it's corrosion on there or not, but actually it looks pretty good. I don't think I've got a problem with that. I need to pull that into position. And it's always a bugger for jumping off your tweezers. You might need some better tweezers than this. Alright, more tweezers. Oh. Excuse me. That's better. So that's in position. This is all latched in position. We've got our standoffs, little brass standoffs at each end. If I lift the cover into position, that went nicely into position. Now there's screws that hold that. I know one of them was corroded and we'll be using that one instead. I don't think the other one was too flash, so we'll get the other one in my parts shutter. That one down, and the lever, the little settings lever for our flash sink, goes in there, and this screw is the pivot point for that lever and also holds down the plate. And get the return spring hooked into position. That's the detent. Tighten those two screws up. That's all that in position. The B lever. I haven't really had a look at the condition of the B lever yet. That looks okay. There's got a tiny mark in the middle of it, which may be corrosion, but it's not significant, and it's probably not going to cause me any problems. Let me just wipe this down. You can't really tell what you've got until you clean these things typically. Can't tell what's a greasy mark and what's a spot of corrosion. Oh, that looks fine. It's more than adequate for the job. That goes on there. Now the screw for that was rusty. So I want a better screw, and it'll be the one here from the parts camera that I've just taken, parts shutter I've just taken apart. And its return spring. So we'll use this one. Swing that spring around. That's okay. The spring goes round a groove on the screw head. It's important that the spring is round the groove on the screw head and not trapped underneath the screw head, otherwise you'll have trouble. Things just won't move freely. I'll just get the spring positioned correctly. This end in particular is difficult to get hooked in. That's it. See if I can get that across. That's hooked in. And this one, not just inside the case, it needs to come over that lever. Like that, so that this lever is sprung loaded and this lever is sprung loaded. Let's check the action of that B lever. Now the end of that spring's not sitting right. That's better. Okay, so I've got my springs in place. And the next component I need to worry about here is my shutter release lever. And this of course has got a little bit of corrosion on it, and that might make it stiff in its action and it may not release smoothly, or it may release but when you use the B setting it may not return to the rest position correctly. So I've got one here for my part shutter. I'm checking to see it's the same shape and it's not. Zoom in a bit. Here's the one from the camera we're working on. You can see it's fairly plain here. This is the one from my parts camera. It's got a cutaway at that point. So I need to find one that's that shape. I don't have one there. I might be searching through my parts boxes again shortly. Oh, here, what's this one? There's one. It's not exactly beautiful, but it's in better condition. It's missing the spring. I'd have to put the spring onto it. Here's another one. It's in no prettier condition and it's also missing its spring. Right. That shaft's not bent, is it? Okay, we'll use this one and I'll transfer the spring from the other lever, from the old lever. Ooh, you can see this will be fun. One end of the spring is wound around this post. Yeah, I've got it unhooked. Now I've just got to lift it off out of its groove. There it is. There's the spring. Well, I'll clean this lever while I've got that spring off there because it's easier to deal with it. And then I've got to try and wriggle that spring into place. Okay. What have I got to achieve? Well, it goes on there and I've got to get that sitting over that boss. See if I put that up on my block of wood so I've got a platform to work on. If I drop that pin down through a hole in the block of wood, have I got a hole in the block of wood I can use? Probably not. No, okay. Get this over the edge of the block. Oh yeah, I've got too many lumps and bumps on this. It doesn't really want to sit flat anywhere. What have we got? Oh, excuse me. Alright, well now it's the following day and I did get that spring onto that lever. It went without much argument at all once I finally found 5 minutes to do it. And that's ready to go back in the shutter too. So, I will just put a touch of molybdenum paste onto the little hole where it pivots on that bracket. It's sometimes a bit tricky getting the spring seated for that lever. It's just a weird shaped spring and it's just awkward. It's always been awkward. I don't know how they got to that state. I imagine that adding the sync mechanism to basically what was an existing shutter design. Sort of did that for them. There really wasn't much room to put anything else. Okay, so what stage is the shutter at now? Everything's in there. Except this, the main lever. Now I'm looking at the state of this and it shows no corrosion at all, which is good. So I will clean that. And I'm also interested in this front settings ring here to see if that will clean up. If it's fairly marked, and those sorts of marks are maybe oil. They're a bit odd looking if that's patches of oil. Let's have a quick look at this. Oh, that is cleaning up. Yeah, there is some residual sort of haziness to that chrome, but that's almost entirely hidden, so I'm not bothered by that. And there's no corrosion, so I will clean that up. I think that'll be fine. Right, I'll clean up these two components and then we can close the shutter, I think. Right, I'll put a little bit of molybdenum paste around the inside and outside edge of this main lever or cocking ring. And apply a little bit on the tip of the bird paw and just a few surfaces in here. Here on the retard gear train where the lever comes across, there where that runs against the settings dial. Here and here. And that'll probably do me, I think. Let's get that shutter release button back in place. I'll cock this by moving the lever across. That sets the flash sync mechanism. Lower this into place. Pull the B lever back out of the way. Pull that lever across. That's in place. And hook the spring over its post. Put the spring here on the latch lever here that holds the shutter in the cocked position. That appears to be good. I think everything's in position. So I don't know what the speeds will be like because I've got the mechanism plate from a different shutter than the main lever came from, so the speeds could be subtly off, and we'll have to find out. Just here is where the 500th of a second spring runs around that edge. Let's get this in position. Make sure that the B lever is pulled up out of the way. That's good. Cock this. When the shutter opens and closes on B, fine. And this is the 1 second speed. That seems to run okay. The 10th of a second to be somewhere around here. That seemed reasonable. It might be a bit quick. but that seemed quite good. I'm just going to clean this front cover ring, put that in place, and then test all my shutter speeds. Does that not want to go on there? That's better. And I still haven't got my correct screwdriver in front of me, so we'll just use a pair of tweezers to rotate that lock, I think. No, it doesn't want to go. I'll get the screwdriver. Oh, here it is. Right. Okay, well I'll test this on my shutter speed tester. Typically if the 1/10 of the second speed works well and the 25th of the second speed works well and is clearly faster than the 1/10 of the second speed, then usually you're not far away from accurate. I'll find out. Well, the shutter speeds, although somewhat incorrect, are scattered slightly up and down the scale, with some speeds at one end of the scale being slightly slow and others being slightly fast, but in general they're pretty good and they're fairly proportional. They're certainly get faster as you move up the scale and slower as you move the other way, so I'm not overly concerned with that. I think that's probably as good as we're going to get this one, given its original limitations. So I'm just putting my flash contact wire in place. So I've put the wire in the back of the terminal, put the plastic insulator slug down the hole. Now I'm trying to start the small screw, the grub screw that pushes the plastic slug, which fixes the wire, pushes the wire firmly in place in contact with the flash sync contact. Right, that's good. So I'll just get that cocking rack in place, and there should be 2 screws here for the case. This one has an integral washer. This is the locating screw that locates the shutter on the camera so that the shutter doesn't rotate as the cocking action goes. Just get that one in place. And we've got 1 small screw now. I've got some similar looking screws here, so I've got to be sure I pick up the right one. It's one of these, and I think it's that one. Yep, that's a good fit. That's just what we want. So the detent for our aperture settings, well, the wider spacings go at this end, the wider aperture end of the scale. So I'll slide that in there under the case and clip the other end in. So we've got our click stops. A bit grabby there. No, they're all right, they're good. And that only requires me to clean the retaining ring And the shims, of course, and this is the front space, so that goes under the front lens component. So I'll just clean these components up. The lens, I'm looking at the lens, it's pretty dirty on the outside. There's probably maybe some imperfections there we'll talk about, but I'll get this lot cleaned up and put those together. Then I want to put the shutter back on the camera and see if it behaves itself.